The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So I lived in New York for several years, and it's very easy to inadvertently end up involved in some kind of scam in New York. And a lot of the scams are sort of benign in the sense that you'll end up annoyed, but not necessarily feeling like you need to call authorities. And I mean, listen, you could say that a scam is that a pretzel costs $8, right? Like that, in a sense, is a scam. Although I don't know that you're necessarily going to be calling the police over that one. It turns out that Alec Baldwin was one of the many people scammed by a tour company, which claims to be a tour of the Statue of Liberty, but they only take you around the Statue of Liberty in a boat. They don't actually go to the Statue of Liberty. And Alec Baldwin posted it to Instagram. It was, I guess, $40 per ticket. It says, tours are us, see New York from the water, whatever else. And in any case, he mentioned that this is a scam in two ways. One, that it doesn't go to the Statue of Liberty. Also, that it leaves from Liberty Park, New Jersey, which was not exactly where he thought. He thought this was like a New York based tour. And now there is a big crackdown starting with the New York City Department of Transportation trying to get people to not fall for these scams. And listen, I mean, I guess it's an honest mistake, Pat. It does say Liberty, New Jersey on the ticket. I don't believe that this was the aggressive type of scam that Alec Baldwin maybe is making it out to be. But there's so many of these shady operators where it sounds like it's a tour from New York, but actually you got to take a shuttle bus to New Jersey and the boat leaves from there. If I had to guess why, it's probably cheaper to dock the boat in Jersey than it is in New York City. New York is filled with this stuff, and many big cities around the world are.
I think it's a scam. If you take a look at the picture of the ticket, you see the Statue of Liberty clearly on it. And I think that most people just showing up to New York City don't realize that you can take the Staten Island ferry across the water for free,
which I've done.
Then you can go right back and you get a pretty good view of the Statue of Liberty. But if you want to go to Liberty Island itself, there's only one tour company that does that. The average person just visiting New York isn't going to know that. They're not going to know the specifics. And so companies can get away with doing stuff like this. And I would imagine that New York City officials are only looking into this now because Alec Baldwin is this big star who's making a big thing out of it on social media. If it was anyone else, I don't think they would be paying attention to it.
One of the coolest things I did in terms of like the waterways in New York City when I lived there was I did an evening jazz boat ride. And it was not a large boat. I think it maybe was for like, I want to say 20 people or something like that. It was like 10 couples. They had a live jazz band. They drove, and you knew that you weren't stopping at the Statue of Liberty. You were just going around New York. And it went by the Statue of Liberty. It went up the East River a little bit and then kind of swung back around, went by the Statue of Liberty again, docked back over on the Hudson side. It was a really great experience. And the best part about it was I didn't end up getting seasick. I have a tendency not to feel great on boats. And it was absolutely delightful. Nobody got scammed. I knew we weren't stopping at the Statue of Liberty. We left from New York. We didn't have to take a shuttle to Jersey or anything like that. That's much more wholesome fun for the family, I feel like.
Yeah, no complaints, it sounds like. I do the Boston Harbor cruise every now and then, maybe every few years. Yeah, but you don't get to see as many sights. Like, you get to see the skyscrapers, but it's not the same thing as being in New York getting to go by the Statue of Liberty. I mean, that's an entirely unique experience. You can only get that in New York.
I never did it in all the time I lived in New York. The only time I went to the Statue of Liberty, I must have been 10 years old. And, you know, the thing that's happening is I hate tourist crap. I just hate it. And one of the things I consider to be tourist crap are these overpriced things where they just like shepherd like cows, like cattle, tourists onto a boat and then off of it. And I just don't want anything to do with it. I don't want the crowds. I don't want the nonsense. I find myself instantly annoyed with the people around me. So that more than anything has kept me from doing a lot of the stuff in Boston. Like, I've never done a duck tour in Boston, which are these boats that also drive on the road. They have wheels, but it's also a boat. I've never done it, and I probably won't because it is just such a touristy, annoying experience. The Boston Harbor cruise, I don't know that much about.
I haven't done the duck tour either, and that's a go-to for tourists that come here.
Yeah.
And I've just never had the inclination to do it, maybe it's because I always have the opportunity to, so
Right.
I just never, decide to take myself up on it. Whereas if I was visiting a city and that was like the go-to thing that tourists do, I would feel like I would have to, like I would be missing out if I didn't. And that's oftentimes the feeling that I get when I go to these cities. You like have to do the major touristy things, otherwise you leave feeling like you didn't accomplish all that you could have accomplished.
Yeah.
That's how I feel anyway.
Yeah, I'm trying to limit that feeling when I go to visit like European cities where I don't have to do everything. I've seen enough churches, I'll walk by it, but I don't need to go inside at every opportunity. And I just try to take in the sounds and the smells and the noises or whatever. I guess noises are the same thing as sounds, although sometimes they're not exactly the same thing. Yeah, I'm trying to do less of that and more of just living in the place for brief periods of time than checking off boxes, so to speak. Let's talk about virtual reality. Walmart is training more than 1 million employees starting this year with virtual reality. And more companies are doing this. Moving companies, airlines, food processing, and financial firms, they're using virtual reality for training in different ways. And I think that this is actually a really great idea. You can very quickly, you have more upfront costs maybe for establishing everything that needs to be established to do training with virtual reality. But then you can have workers, for example, fix a plane in VR without using real parts, without possibly messing something up. And when they finish, you just go right back to the beginning and you can start over again. I think that this is a very interesting development technologically, but also my concern about vulture capitalist companies makes me also realize that this is one of the ways in which a company is saving money on training without really any of that savings necessarily being passed along to workers, right? I mean, it's another way for a company to save money in the end.
Yeah, well, couldn't it be a win-win? Like the company saves money and the worker is more equipped to do their job. They're
Sure.
inclined to make fewer mistakes, and they can go on in their careers, taking the skills that they learned at that one company, using the VR stuff and help advance themselves that way. I think it could be marketed as a win-win. Yeah, I mean, like I haven't done too much VR stuff, but it seems like once you have one of those headsets on for even just a few minutes, you're like completely immersed in the thing. Like you forget that you're standing in an office somewhere. You think you're actually in this new world, and you may start to sweat and have the sort of reactions that you would have if you were actually living an experience like that. So I think it makes all the sense in the world. And the fact that you can just do it over and over again. Like if you mess up on something major, let's say there's like a situation where you're a cashier and someone in the virtual reality experience wants to rob you.
Yes.
If you mess up, if you do the wrong thing, just start over again. You can get the reps in, whereas you can't do that if you were actually experiencing a robbery.
It's interesting about the robbery. I guess Verizon stores, I mean, I guess it sort of makes sense, but apparently cell phone stores are often the targets of robberies, particularly in higher crime areas. Verizon has a training VR simulator to train workers to handle armed robberies at gunpoint, what to do, what not to do, which is a sad commentary on society that that's a VR exercise that they're doing.
Yeah, but maybe if a employee has trained in VR, has gone through this a few times where they see a fake person trying to rob them, they will be better prepared to deal with it when an actual person comes to rob them. I mean, that's just a cool little thing. And I wonder how we can use VR here at the David Pakman Show. Like maybe I can edit in virtual reality. Maybe I can deal with the stinky lunches that you bring in sometimes in virtual reality, so I'm better prepared to deal with it when it actually happens in the real world.
Yes, that's right. We have a no durian policy at the office because of what was nearly a human resources debacle. It is vegan, but that doesn't mean that Pat's necessarily going to be pleased with it. That's what we found out very, very quickly. Horrible story out of Mexico. 11 people have been arrested in southern Mexico after they dragged the mayor of the village out onto the street, tied him to a pickup truck, and dragged him throughout the streets. This is all over, who, by the way, reportedly was not injured in any kind of serious way, which is an incredible development in and of itself. This was the second attack by farmers that the mayor fulfill his campaign promise to repair a local road. So this is a very local issue. Local farmers need a repaired road in order to do business. The mayor reportedly made that promise during the campaign, has not actually done it. Farmers are now furious. So what did they do? They dragged him out, tied him up, and drove him around. Incredible that this took place, and also just as incredible that he was not seriously injured.
Yeah, I mean, that's how they used to execute people back in the day. They would tie them to a horse and drag them through the streets. That's what they did in middle-aged England. So I'm surprised that this guy didn't even experience some minor injuries. But anyway, of course, this is horrible. You have to give the usual caveats, like you should never do this.
Right.
Violence is always wrong. You shouldn't drag someone through the streets.
Sure.
But if there's any silver lining to this, isn't it that these people in Mexico want to hold their politicians accountable, and they actually want to see people go through with their campaign promises?
Yeah.
Like here in the United States, people break that stuff all the time, and there's never any consequence for it.
I was going to say, usually in Mexico, when you hear about things like this, it is, drug cartel people who are doing these things as threats or punishment for elected officials that have not done the thing that the cartels want them to do. This is farmers who want to do business who are angry over an unfilled campaign promise. So if there's any silver lining in a completely disgusting act, it's that at least it wasn't cartels trying to get criminality to be endorsed by an elected official, and it was farmers who want to be able to do their business. I mean, it feels weird finding any silver lining in it, Pat.
Yeah, at least there was a crime committed, but it wasn't because they wanted to further other crimes. It was just a crime committed based on something that was very simple. They just want to get the roads fixed. Yeah, I mean, I think this just goes to show this is why you have to have representative governments, right? You have to have politicians who are accountable to the people, because otherwise we're going to succumb to violence. And that's what I sort of worry about here in the United States. Like, there was a lot of talk about, when even like Barack Obama came to office, he had a bunch of campaign promises, and many of them went unfulfilled. Many of them he didn't even try to act on, or just, gave up on quickly. Trump, to his audience, offered a bunch of campaign promises, building the wall with Mexico, all this other stuff that he never followed through with. And I think we're just totally used to it here. I'm sure they're, to some extent used to it around the world, but I think they're a lot more willing to take up action in other places than we are here. I think we're all just desensitized at this point.
I love Mexico, and I've only been to some parts of Mexico. I've obviously never been to the parts that the U.S. State Department says, do not go. These are, like level 4 or whatever is the highest level. Like, we can't help you. You will be outside of the reach of the U.S. Embassy if anything were to happen. It's so sad that there are many parts of Mexico that are in this just terrible shape, where there is, lawlessness and criminality and street justice and all of this stuff. It's such a great place with such interesting culture and food and great people. And at the same time, there are parts of Mexico that are, at least on the recommendations of the State Department, complete and total no-go zones, which of course you've spent time in Mexico, Pat, but even in Mexico City, I'm guessing you weren't going to certain areas. These are entire regions that the State Department says you should not even go near as an American.
Yeah, when I went to Mexico City, I did mostly the touristy type things. I stayed in the central part of the city, and I wasn't really going to the outskirts to parts unknown. And then I also went to the Cancun area, which is of course very touristy, relatively safe. But yeah, I mean, I didn't even think about this consciously, but I'm sure there are many, many parts of Mexico that you just don't want to go to, especially as an American, just someone who's not from the area, because you could be targeted. And if you're the mayor, you could be dragged through the streets, and we don't want to see that either.
Yeah, I'm actually looking up here, State Department Mexico Travel Advisory, to see what it's looking like right now. So in general, the country, I guess, is a level 2, which is just exercise increased caution, which is common in a lot of the world. Like, level 2 is no big deal. But then you get to some areas that are level 3, where you should reconsider travel, like Chihuahua, for example, reconsider travel due to crime. There's a few other areas that are, reconsider travel. But then you get to do not travel due to crime. Widespread gang activity. You will not be able to be helped by the U.S. government employees. This includes Colima State, as well as, where else? Guerrero State, Michoacan, and where else? I'm guessing the Sinaloa area as well. Mm-hmm. A lot of level 2s. Sinaloa is also a level 4. Yeah, so these, I mean, it's basically drug areas, Pat, that it's crime related to drugs, which also is another indicator that we should really be reforming the war on drugs.
Yeah, and I also think that the Paris subway needs to be on that list from the State Department
Right.
because I was almost the victim of a pickpocketing. I almost got my phone and my wallet taken away, and it resulted in me having to kick someone in the chest,
Yes.
which he totally deserved, by the way, and I stand by that decision. But yeah, even in places where you wouldn't necessarily expect crime to happen, that's going on there too. So you always have to be cautious when traveling.
And I also think it's important for us to mention, like, we don't want to be doing that uninformed American thing where we're like, oh, it's so dangerous everywhere. Like,
Yeah.
most of Mexico is level 2, which I'm pretty sure France is also level 2 right now. Just certain areas you have to be careful. That does it for today. New show, new bonus show tomorrow. Pat hosting tomorrow's bonus show, and we will see what he comes up with for us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.